No. Here now? Hey everyone, I'm Alec, or the Climate Chicken.
I'm Sam.
And we'd just like to welcome you all to tonight's event called Cheer Up Bob. This is Bob down here, just waved right then, but you're going to see him in a few moments anyway. Basically, we're going to be cheering the night, and hopefully it'll go well and you'll all be leaving nice and optimistic, including Bob. Basically, the way tonight's going to run is we've got 4 people who are going to talk. Obviously, the first one is going to be Bob, up there in the corner. And following him, we're going to have Jeanette Fitzsimons talking, and then we're going to have Ashton Kelly and then Lloyd Chambers, and we'll introduce them and explain some stuff about them before they all speak. And so Sam can now introduce Bob for you.
Hello. Okay, so Professor Bob Lloyd has a PhD in physics and a master's degree in history and philosophy. He has been involved in a wide variety of consulting work in renewable energy and is a director of energy studies program in Otago. So I'll hand it over to you, Bob.
Thanks very much. I've got a microphone here. Thanks very much. I haven't got a chicken costume though.
It escaped out of that box.
Yeah. Let's get it moving. Oh, we're on the wrong slide. Now I'm screwed. I got a short video to show you later, and I was trying to see whether it worked. There we go. Right, Perspectives on the Future by Bob Lloyd from Energy Studies. So I'm going to talk on what exactly is doomed. But first, a warning. Some slides may disturb. If you're really attached to your present lifestyle, you might like to leave the room because you might get depressed. Before we start talking about what is doomed, I'd better mention what's not doomed, because I've seen some of the posters around campus and they are, quite frankly, depressing. The future is not doomed. It's highly unlikely that time will stop. The Earth is also not doomed, at least not for a few billion years or so. Humanity, too, is probably not doomed. James Lovelock, one of the doomers, which I won't mention further, has suggested that even with drastic climate change, there'll be a few breeding pairs in Antarctica. And I won't be talking about doom books. So what may be doomed? What am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about the world's physical resources, especially the energy supplies. They may be doomed. I'm going to talk about the existing biosphere. Sorry, I have to get my glasses because I can't read that. It's degrading. Many people in fragile and marginal environments are doomed. They're already dying, if you read the newspapers. And resource wars are dooming even more people. These are the real people you need to cheer up and give some hope to, not me. I'm going to be fine, but there's going to be some people who are already doomed. Many species are also doomed. They're currently becoming extinct at an alarming rate. Many fresh water supplies on Earth are degrading. Our fertile soils are also degrading. The important thing is our economic system and the world's fixation on growth, wealth and GDP. They are doomed. I can't see how that they're going to survive a declining world energy supply. Doomsayers for 2011. I thought I'd look it up and see what competition I've got. Business Insider has given a list of 23 doomsayers who predict that we're heading towards a deeper economic depression. Notice it's a business thing. The first one is Nouriel Roubini, who some of you have heard of, an economist. Mervyn King, head honcho at the Bank of UK Bank. Angela Merkel from Germany. LEAP, very interesting group think tank from Europe, and the economics group Bloomberg from the US. And there's a whole host of others who are mostly economists. In doomsaying, timing is everything. You've got to get your timing right. There's a lot of previous doomers who got the timing wrong. And it's really a bit like Chicken Little here. You know, you make mistakes and no one will believe you thereafter. Malthus was one of the first doomers 200 years ago. Actually, there's probably a lot before him. Paul Ehrlich, who some of you may have heard of, Paul Ehrlich followed on from Malthus and said there's going to be a population problem. He had a famous bet with an economist, an optimist called Julian Simon, back in 1980. And the bet was that the world's resources are going to get in more short supply and the prices will go up. And what they did is they bet on a handful of elements, copper, nickel, zinc, tungsten, I think it was, I can't remember. And the idea was that they bought some in 1980 and they settled in 1990. And if the price went up, then Ehrlich would win. If the price went down, then Julian Simon would win. The timing was completely wrong. In 1980, the price of oil was at an all-time high. It's just after the oil crisis. And so the price of all the commodities and the metals were also high. They settled up in 1990. 1990, the oil price had crashed and price of commodities were very low. It made Paul Ehrlich look extremely foolish and gave a big boost to the economists who took the front seat from that point on. Meadows from the Club of Rome report that came out in 1972. They didn't really get the timing wrong. They in fact predicted that all sorts of bad things would happen around about now, between now and the middle of this century. But because of the oil crash in the late 80s, early 80s and 90s, then they were mostly made fun of and dismissed. Okay, have I got the timing right? Well, I did a quick check in Reuters today. Could I just have a bit of a hands up? Because in sort of, you know, looking at the future, you really have to find out whether people read newspapers. I've sort of asked my own students this sometimes, and I usually get fairly blank looks. So, of the student amongst us, who reads newspapers or looks at online news services? Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Okay. I guess the point is that we all should be doomers if we look at the newspapers because they're pretty gloomy. And this is just out of Reuters today. On top of that, just this week, the United Nations announced that they're forming a new form of United Nations soldier, the Green Hats, and the purpose of the Green Hats is to police all the climate change disasters in the world. You know, that's pretty worrying. Okay, so let's get on to the topic which I'm going to talk about, and that's energy resources, at least the first thing. Fossil fuels, oil, coal and gas. I gave my first talk on peak oil in 2005, a little over 6 years ago. After the talk, the head of department came and said, well, Bob, when's the world going to end? And I guess to some extent this lecture is in a reply to that. We'll also look very briefly at nuclear and renewables. Can they save us? Okay, as I said, I've been giving peak oil talks now for 6 years, pretty much over this period here. This is how many barrels per day the world has been producing, and over the last 6 years, almost since the time I first started giving the talk, the world oil production has been pretty flat, at around about 70 something million barrels a day. It's been a slight upturn just in the last quarter. Okay, I'm not going to talk too much more about peak oil. I've talked about it a lot before, but I've sort of been completely made superfluous because very recently, Fatty Birol is the chief economist at the International Energy Agency. If I'm getting this video right.
How much do you think you could afford to pay?
I won't play the whole thing. I'll just try and get what I want.
Including our own, look to for accurate advice.
This multi-government agency is the voice of the mainstream. And I'm here to meet the man at the top.
Hello, Dr. Birrell.
Who just 5 years ago was confidently saying oil production will rise to 120 million barrels a day by 2030. But now?
When we look at the oil markets, the news are not very bright. We think that the crude oil production has already peaked in 2006.
Hang on. Did you get that? Crude oil production for the world peaked in 2006.
The existing fields are declining sharply in North Sea, in United States, in Gulf of Mexico. Just to stay where we are today, we have to find 4 new Saudi Arabias. This is a tall order.
Okay, so what are their current projections, which include...
Okay, I'll stop there. So there's really little point in debating or trying to convince people about peak oil anymore. It's already been said by the man at the top. Okay, so that sort of destroys my talks for the next 5 years. I'll have to retire. Whoops, sorry. Also on peak oil, this document, it's a bit hard to read from the back there, but it was leaked. It was obtained from the UK government under the Freedom of Information Act. It's on the impacts of peak oil. I'll read out some of the risks and longer-term impacts. Higher inflation, increased input costs, upward pressure on wages, higher unemployment, consumer and business confidence falls, downward pressure on GDP, tax revenues fall, falling exports, and other possible impacts, social unrest, resource nationalism, increased geopolitical competition for resources, wars, greater emphasis on security of supply over climate change objectives. And that will be important when we look at climate change, because the problems which are going to be caused by peak oil are going to make it much more difficult to fix up climate change. Governments are looking at this now. They are preparing. The other piece of sort of bad news in the press recently was that the US is deploying troops in the US mainland, 10,000 troops, and setting up centres to cater for disruptions. Okay, so peak oil is here. There's no argument. But it's not synchronous. Developing countries are actually still increasing their consumption. And the developed countries, most of the rich countries, are actually static or decreasing. These are a couple of graphs I took off the oil drum a week or so ago. These are all the increasing countries in the world. The bottom one here, again, it's a bit hard to read, is China. Then there's India, Russia, all the others. The only developed countries on this list are, in fact, Australia and Norway. And Norway, of course, because it's a producer, and Australia because it's producing stuff mostly for China. The decreasing countries are all the rest. The bottom one there is, of course, the US, the big one, then Japan, and going up through Europe, and right up the top up there somewhere is New Zealand. So all these countries have had a static or declining energy supply for the last nearly a decade. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, let's look at gas. Colin Campbell is the head of the Association for the Study of Peak Oil. I spent my study leave with Colin in 2005. He's been putting out stuff on peak oil and, again, he's a bit superfluous. But this figure at least not only gives the peak oil picture, but also the gas picture. The other thing I need to mention is the interview with Fatty Birrell was for crude oil. On top of oil, there are other things, and the other things are the liquids you can get from tar sands, the liquids you can get from natural gas liquids, and there's a bit of biofuels there as well. So you have to be a bit careful when you talk about peak oil, whether people are saying it's peak crude oil or peak oil.